absolutely clear about the choice at this election. What we saw this morning was a desperate wish list of unfunded promises from a weak Prime Minister. We know where these sorts of unfunded promises from Conservative Party Prime Ministers lead. They lead to higher mortgages, leaving you and your family worse off. They've done it before, and their manifesto today is proof that they will do it all over again. This is a recipe for 5 more years of Tory chaos, which will leave British people paying the price. Today I want to address directly the costs of the Conservative Party manifesto. The money is not there, and it will mean £4,800 on your mortgage. This election falls at an important moment for the British economy. 14 years of Conservative governments have brought us to this point. 14 years of political chaos. 14 years of rising taxes and low growth, resulting in the first Parliament on record where living standards are lower at the end of the Parliament than they were at the start. Our national debt at the highest level since the 1960s. And while their rhetoric today is about tax cuts, their record is one of tax rises. 26 increases in tax in this Parliament alone, yielding the highest tax burden in 70 years. The Conservatives are gaslighting you, and no one will believe their claims. I've been clear throughout my time as Shadow Chancellor. I want taxes on working people to be lower. In the last Parliament, I opposed tax rises and I supported cuts in tax, including to national insurance, but only when they are fully funded. Labour's manifesto will include an ironclad commitment. There will be no increases in income tax, national insurance or VAT with a Labour government for the duration of the next Parliament. But we will only cut taxes when the money is there. In contrast, the Tories offer promises they cannot fund from savings that they cannot find. And when it comes to the plans in this Tory manifesto, the money is simply not there, and it will mean £4,800 more on your mortgage. To pretend otherwise is dishonest and it's irresponsible. Over the last 4.5 hours, we have gone through the Conservative manifesto line by line. They claim that their plans are fully costed and fully funded. But analysis that we have conducted since publication has identified £71 billion of unfunded commitments over the course of the next Parliament. The consequence of an increase in day-to-day borrowing to fund the commitments made in this manifesto would amount to a second Tory mortgage bombshell, because higher borrowing at this scale would force the Bank of England to increase interest rates. The result would be an increase in the average mortgage totalling £4,800 over the course of the Parliament. This is serious. I worked as an economist at the Bank of England before entering politics. I know the importance of sound money and having a firm grip on the public finances. If these Conservative policies are followed through, it poses a real threat to our economy and to household incomes. Now, I want to be transparent about how we've reached the figures, because I am determined that the Labour Party will hold ourselves, that I will hold myself to higher standards than the Conservative Party holds themselves. So we have set out clearly in the document we're publishing today the logic and the workings behind all of our findings. In particular, I want to draw attention to 5 serious errors in the Conservative Party's manifesto. Let me take each of them in turn. First, they have spent much of the first 3 weeks of this campaign pushing their national service proposal. But their costings for their plan omit the costs of equipment, accommodation or training of the 30,000 new military recruits. On any reasonable assessment, that plan will cost double their costings, and it would consume the entire revenue that they can reasonably expect to raise from cracking down on tax avoidance. That leaves many of their remaining plans unfunded. Second, the Tories claim that their crackdown on tax avoidance and evasion would raise £6 billion. But the truth is, despite trying to mimic Labour's plans, they have failed to account for the near £900 million of investment needed to meet their pledge. Third, the Tories claim that they can make more than £1 billion of efficiency savings from government agencies. But the truth is, they've provided absolutely no detail whatsoever. This is not a credible plan. Fourth, the Tories claim that they can raise £1 billion from scrapping poor-performing university courses. But the truth is, because they have no plan to cap the number of student places, that falls apart if students simply choose to study a different course. And fifth, the Tories claim that they can make £12 billion in savings in welfare. But the truth is, that claim is simply not credible. It is true that under the Conservatives, the welfare bill has spiralled. Since 2019, spending on benefits to support disabled people and those with health conditions has risen in real terms by £20 billion. And under Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, the taxpayer has been losing £1 million every single hour to benefit fraud and error. That is their record. And there are savings to be made. But the idea that the Conservatives' proposals can save £12 billion is pure fiction. Reform of the work capability assessment, reform of fit notes, increased sanctions for people out of work for more than a year, and increased funding for mental health, all announced last year, are all included in the baseline from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Each of the other three proposals are no more than vague ambitions, with no detail of how they could produce the savings that they're aiming for. Of 7 separate pledges on welfare that they made today, in every case, the money has either already been banked by the OBR, or they have no credible plans on how to make the savings. Their much heralded revenue raiser will produce not one single penny of new money relative to the OBR forecast. We've been here before. It was less than 2 years ago that the Conservatives set out tens of billion pounds of unfunded commitments. They crashed the economy, sent mortgage rates spiralling, and put pensions in peril. In the end, you got the mortgage increase, but you didn't get the tax cut. And that is exactly what you'll get all over again. Don't judge 14 years on 49 days, says Rishi Sunak. And they should be judged on the whole of their 14-year record. But the damage done in those 49 days will last for years. Last year, 6.4 million people across England and Wales saw their rent increase or had to remortgage. A further 1.5 million households have either remortgaged this year or will do so in the second half of this year, paying on average an additional £240 mortgage payments every single month. And this manifesto is final confirmation, if any were needed, that they have not learned their lesson. This is about Tory future, not just about Tory past. A recipe for 5 more years of chaos. Cast your mind back to a little over 18 months ago. Rishi Sunak was supposed to be the antidote to Liz Truss. He was supposed to steady the ship. You have to ask, what happened to that Rishi Sunak? Instead of drawing a line under the chaos, he's determined to write the next chapter of it. More undeliverable promises from an ungovernable party. Just 2 weeks ago, Rishi Sunak's Chancellor said that a third cut to national insurance wouldn't move the dial. And now that we find, in a last-minute desperate scramble, that is exactly what they're proposing, but with no plan to pay for it. And here's the thing. If they did believe that their sums added up, if they thought that they would get the all clear from the Office for Budget Responsibility, they wouldn't have put these plans in a manifesto. They would have put them in a budget. They know their numbers don't add up, and the Conservatives' desperation will put our economy at risk. The money is not there, and it will mean £4,800 on your mortgage. You will see something very different when we publish our manifesto on Thursday. A fully costed, fully funded credible plan. I will not raise taxes on working people. And I will not raise income tax, national insurance, or VAT with the Labour government for the duration of the next Parliament. In fact, I want taxes to be lower. But I will not play fast and loose with the public finances. The change that we offer will be built, can only be built, on the basis of iron discipline. I know that economic stability is the foundation for economic success. We will not enter an arms race on unfunded election promises. We have started as we mean to go on. Every policy we announce, every line in our manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded. And that is the attitude that I will take into the Treasury. A Labour government will not waver from tough spending rules. And I will introduce a new fiscal lock so that any government making significant and permanent tax and spending changes will be subject to an independent forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility, so that there can be no repeat of the Conservatives' mini budget. That is my commitment to you, a commitment that the Conservatives will not match. Over the next 3 weeks, we will work every day to expose the damage that the Conservatives have done to our country, to expose what they threaten to do if given 5 more years, and to offer a credible, a responsible alternative. That is the choice at this election. 5 more years of Conservative chaos, which will mean £4,800 more on your mortgage, or stability with a changed Labour Party. Thank you very much. Right, I'll take some questions now. Let's start with Jack from BBC.
Thank you. Is that working? Jack Fenwick, BBC News. You spoke about wanting to be clear and transparent when it comes to taxes, and you've been very clear about which taxes you wouldn't raise. But twice this week, Sir Keir Starmer has refused to rule out an increase to capital gains tax. This morning, he wouldn't comment on further sugar and salt taxes. Why are you being clear about certain taxes but not about others?
Well, all of our plans are fully costed and fully funded. There will not be anything in our manifesto. There is nothing in our plans that require any additional increases in taxes. Indeed, I want taxes to be lower, but unlike the Conservatives, I will never make those commitments without being able to say where the money is going to come from. Under the Conservatives' plans, the money is simply not there, and that's why it will result in higher mortgage costs worth £4,800. The next question is from Carl from ITV.
Thank you very much. Can you rule out following the Tories' national insurance cuts, and can we therefore now say that under a Labour government national insurance would be higher for many people than it would be under the Conservatives?
Well, I opposed the Conservatives when they increased national insurance in the last Parliament, and I supported them when they cut national insurance, but only with an independent forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. And without that forecast, you can't believe a word the Conservatives say. If they thought the money was there, they would have done this in a budget. Instead, they've done it in a manifesto. The money is not there. That's why this will only result in higher borrowing and therefore higher mortgage costs worth £4,800. John Craig from Sky.
John Major used to say, dogs bark, cats meow, Labour puts up taxes. At least we were spared that sort of eloquence today. But the Conservative charge, of course, is that they will cut taxes, you will put them up. Now, they're going to hammer you on this between now and polling day. You and Sir Keir have said it's the claim about the £2,000 tax grab is a lie. That's not going to shut them up. They're going to continue to hammer you on that. Why not come clean with people and say, look, we're ambitious. If we are elected, there's lots we want to do. We will have to raise some taxes. And just following on from the last 2 questions, can you categorically tell us what you're going to do about national insurance? Because you said you opposed increases, you said you supported cuts. What's your response to what they've announced today? And can you specifically say what you're going to do about capital gains tax? Because you and Sir Keir we're none the wiser. Is it going up or not?
Right. So the Conservatives have increased taxes to the highest level in 70 years. They've increased taxes 26 times during the course of this Parliament. So the Tories are gaslighting people. They're not tax cutters, they're tax risers. Taxes have risen under the Conservatives, and indeed, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, taxes are due to rise in each of the next 5 years of the forecast. That is their record. They are the ones who increase taxes. I want taxes on working people. I want taxes to be lower. But I am not going to make any commitments without being able to say where the money is going to come from. Because Liz Truss made a load of commitments in her mini-budget. You didn't get any of the tax cuts, but you did get the increase in mortgages. And that is exactly what you're going to get again. Rishi Sunak said he was the antidote to Liz Truss. Instead, he's cosplaying Liz Truss by, again, doing what the Conservatives did in that mini-budget, with, in this case, £71 billion of unfunded commitments. So they're not going to cut national insurance, or if they do, all it's going to mean is £4,800 more on your mortgage. On other taxes, look, I want taxes to be lower. I wake up every morning not thinking how I can raise taxes, but how I can grow the economy. Because in the end, it's only through growing the economy that you can improve living standards, have money for our public services, and, crucially, keep taxes low. And that's why our manifesto will focus on how to grow the economy to do exactly those things. But, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, there is absolutely nothing in our manifesto, absolutely nothing in our plan that requires any increases in taxes beyond the limited changes that we have already announced. I'll come next to Paul McNamara, Channel 4 News.
Afternoon, Chancellor. Just the one question from Channel 4. You said 3 times up there the Conservative plan will, a definitive will, mean £4,800 on your mortgage. On this flashy document you've given us, it says it twice in the front page. Then get right to the very bottom of the second page, and it says, for someone on an 85% mortgage on the average house in the UK, this could increase mortgage payments by £4,800 over the Parliament. So presumably that's over the 5 years. Aren't you guilty here of doing exactly the thing you're accusing the Conservative of, which is playing fast and loose and picking the biggest, scariest numbers you can and not being honest with voters?
So if you go through the document, and particularly the scorecard, it sets out £71 billion of unfunded commitments during the course of this Parliament, rising in the final year of the forecast period to £17 billion of unfunded plans. The Treasury's own estimates show that for a 1 percentage point increase in government borrowing adds 56 basis points to mortgage rates, and that is where the figure of £4,800 during the course of the next Parliament comes from. Those are the higher mortgage costs that people will be subject to if the Conservatives try to do what they've set out in their manifesto today.
That some could be paid.
Well, this is based on the unfunded commitments that they've put out, and then using the Treasury's own numbers that Laura Trott, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, uses regularly to say what additional borrowing impact there will be on interest rates. So we're using the Treasury's own numbers to make that assessment. But, you know, you don't just have to look to the future, look at the past. 1.5 million people remortgaging this year, paying on average £240 more a month because of what the Conservatives did just under 2 years ago with their mini-budget, which had a load of unfunded commitments in it. In the end, we didn't get those tax cuts, but we did get those mortgage increases because the Conservatives played fast and loose with the public finances. Well, that is what they're threatening in this manifesto to do again, and we can see that very clearly in their proposals today. Fraser Knight from LBC.
Thank you. Earlier today, Sir Keir Starmer said that the Conservative manifesto was a Jeremy Corbyn-style one. Do you agree with that, and why did he say that when he and indeed you campaigned on that in 2019? And just on taxes, you say you won't make any announcements until you know where the money comes from, but can you say categorically that the tax burden will be lower by the end of the next Parliament if Labour's in government?
Well, first of all, what we saw in 2019 from the Labour Party was unfunded commitments. And even though some people said that individually those proposals were popular, you add them all up and it didn't add up. And that's why people rejected that manifesto. But we can look to the more recent past and the Conservative mini-budget just under 2 years ago. And in that Conservative mini-budget, there were £46 billion of unfunded proposals, in that case around tax cuts. What we saw was that she couldn't follow through on it, but the damage was already done. Mortgage rates spiralled, and people found themselves paying the £1.5 million remortgaging this year alone, paying £240 extra. So we know what happens when unfunded commitments are made. You can't believe that those commitments are actually going to happen, but what you can guarantee is the financial market turbulence and the higher mortgage rates that they bring. On the tax burden, I want taxes to be lower. The tax burden is at the highest level in 70 years, but there's a big difference between myself and the Conservative Party, because while they're willing to make commitments without being able to say where the money is going to come from, I will never do that. I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, because when you do so, you play fast and loose with family finances. The problem with what the Conservatives have put forward today is that the money is simply not there, and that is why all it will end up doing is adding to people's mortgage costs, £4,800 in the next Parliament. Peter Walker next from The Guardian.
Hi, Rachel, there's been a lot of talk about the kind of credibility of whether or not the figures in manifestos add up. There was talk a few years ago in Labour of potentially getting the OBR to look over the calculations in manifestos. I mean, there might obviously be kind of practical difficulties with that. Is something like that something you would think might be a good idea for future elections?
Well, I think Labour asked the OBR to do that in 2015, and they said that they didn't have the resources or the mandate to do that. But I know there will be many others who will be scrutinising all parties' manifestos, and that's why I've been so clear that everything in our manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded. I think if there's one thing that people know about me from the time I've been Shadow Chancellor is that I'm absolutely committed to sound money and ensuring that the numbers always add up. That's in stark contrast from what we've seen from the Conservative Party today, that have put forward a load of proposals and just, frankly, the money is not there, which is why all that will end up happening is that interest rates go up and mortgage costs for families will go up on top of the mortgage increases that families have already faced during the course of this Parliament. Ryan Savey from The Sun.
Thank you, Shadow Chancellor. What's your position on fuel duty when it comes to a future budget? Not only the 5p temporary cut, but also raising it in general. Where do you stand on that ahead of your manifesto, and what's your message to drivers?
Well, I would say, Ryan, judge me on my record, every time the fuel duty has threatened to go up, we've opposed it. We've supported the freezes in fuel duty every time during the course of this Parliament. Indeed, I backed the Sun's campaign to freeze fuel duty ahead of the last budget and pushed the government to do just that. So judge me on my record on that, Ryan. Lizzie, can I just say it's great to see another woman in the room.
Thank you. The March budget paved the way for billions of pounds of cuts to vital public services like local government. Can you level with voters about what you'll do about that, or are we facing a fresh wave of austerity?
No, there will be no return to austerity with the Labour government. It's why we've set out the immediate injection of cash into our frontline public services. It's why we will finally close those non-dom tax loopholes and crack down on tax avoidance, but unlike the Conservatives, putting the money into HMRC so we can actually crack down on the tax avoidance. It's why there'll be VAT and business rates on private schools to put that money into the 6,500 additional teachers. It's why we'll extend the windfall tax on the big profits the energy companies are making and plough that money into GB Energy and a national wealth fund. So we've set out an immediate injection of cash into our public services, but then beyond that we have to grow our economy. And that's why what the Conservatives have done today is so dishonest, because the money is simply not there for what they are proposing. Our manifesto will be very different. Every line will be fully costed and fully funded. We're not going to resort to these gimmicks. We're not going to enter into an arms race of unfunded commitments, because when you play fast and loose like this with the public finances in the way that Liz Truss did less than 2 years ago, all that ends up happening is that interest rates go up, and people pay more on their mortgages. And that is, in the end, what the Conservatives are offering with their manifesto today. Thanks, Lizzie. Hugo Guy from the Eye.
Thank you. You've repeatedly said that interest rates would rise under a Conservative government. Are you confident that interest rates would fall under a Labour government, and when do you think they would start falling?
Well, I was an economist for many years at the Bank of England, and so I'm not going to prejudge what they would, when they're going to cut or interest rates, but I think many families very much looking forward to cuts in interest rates after the increases that we've seen. The problem with the Conservative Party manifesto today is it puts in jeopardy cuts in interest rates and actually makes increases in interest rates much more likely. That's why we've set out the numbers today based on the Treasury estimates of what happens to interest rates when borrowing increases, and that's where that number of £4,800 comes from. People saw after the mini-budget last year, just over a year and a half ago, what happens when governments put forward unfunded commitments that would result in higher borrowing. And what happens is that interest rates spiral and ordinary working families pay the price. I will never do that. That's why I've committed to the tough fiscal lock and the commitment that I will never put forward permanent and significant tax and spending changes without an independent forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility. That's something the Conservatives won't sign up to, and you can see why after the manifesto today. Dominic from the Telegraph.
Thanks, Shadow Chancellor. When you were chair of the Business Committee in 2018, you advocated equalising capital gains tax with income tax, which would increase it to the tune of 14 billion. Can you rule this out in government? And considering that you haven't answered colleagues on this, will you rule out an increase in capital gains tax?
Those are not Labour Party policies, they're not my policies. Everything in our manifesto and everything in my plans is fully costed and fully funded and do not require any additional increases in taxation. I want taxes on working people to be lower, but unlike the Conservatives, I'm not willing to announce a load of unfunded commitments on tax or on spending because, frankly, they're simply not believable unless you can say where the money is going to come from. David Maddox from The Independent.
Thanks, Shadow Chancellor. Today you're giving a figure with lots of caveats about how mortgages might rise. The Tories have been saying with some caveats about how you might raise taxes. If we look at the polls, we're looking at potentially the lowest turnout in a general election. Is perhaps one of the reasons for that is that people just don't believe what either of you are saying, and there's a disillusionment and disconnect in the public?
Well, one of the reasons why everything in Labour's manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded, because I believe that you should be honest with people about what you can and can't do. And the Conservatives are just continually adding baubles to their Christmas tree of more giveaways, but without being able to say where the money comes from. And this money is simply not there, which is why, in the end, all that will happen if the Conservatives try to follow through on these proposals, if given another 5 years, is that mortgage rates will go up and working families will end up paying the price for that. George Eaton from the New Statesman.
Rachel, as you'll know, the Bank of England currently pays 5.25% interest to commercial banks on the money it created under QE. This effective subsidy costs the taxpayer around £23 billion a year. Would you consider tiering reserve remuneration as the European Central Bank does to save the taxpayer money?
We've got no plans to do that, and actually the paying of interest on reserves is part of the transmission mechanism for monetary policy. It's one of the ways that higher interest rates filter through to the real economy, so I don't think that would be without its dangers. Joe Mays from Bloomberg.
Rachel, Labour has ruled out, as you say, increasing income tax, VAT, corporation tax, national insurance, but you use this language of having no plans when asked about capital gains tax, wealth taxes, other property taxes, inheritance tax. Do you use the words no plans because it gives you the space in government to then say, well, we didn't have plans then, But we do have plans now because we've seen the state of the public finances and we see that this is necessary to fix public services.
No, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I will face. I don't need to become Chancellor to know what a mess the government have made of public finances, of public services, and the fact that the tax burden is at its highest level in 70 years. We don't need higher taxes. What we need is growth. I don't want to, and I will have no plans to increase any taxes beyond those which we have already set out. The VAT and business rates on private schools, the extension of the windfall tax, the changes about how private equity bosses are taxed, and the policies that we have announced, the non-doms as well. Those are the only changes to tax that we need to fund our plans. I'm very clear about that. I want to grow our economy because that is the only way that we can sustainably improve living standards, have the money for public services, and also keep taxes as low as we possibly can. That is what I'm determined to do, to grow the economy, not to do what the Conservatives have done, which is to increase taxes 26 times, including capital gains tax, during the course of this Parliament. Taxes are at a 70-year high. I do not want the tax burden to rise further. I want the tax burden to fall. But unlike the Conservatives, I am not willing to make policy commitments, whether that's on tax or on spending, without being able to say where the money is going to come from. The problem is the Conservatives know the money is not there. They're committing it anyway because they are desperate. And if they had a chance with 5 more years to implement these proposals, the only thing that would happen is that families pay more on their mortgages. Thank you very much. I think that is it. But I did think poor old Jim Pickard. Jim Pickard from the FT.
Yes, so in an interview with The Telegraph in August last year, you told The Telegraph August last year that you were ruling out wealth taxes, including an increase in CGT. Did they misquote you, or have you changed your mind since then? And on this...
Well, no, I haven't changed my mind, because as I've already said, we have no plans to increase CGT. I do not want to increase taxes. I want taxes to be lower. I want to grow the economy so we have money for public services, so that living standards improve, and so we can keep the tax burden as low as possible. That is why all of my focus is not on tax and spend. It's why all of my focus is on what is needed to grow the economy, the stability we need to bring back to the economy, the investment through a national wealth fund, and the reform, particularly reform of our planning system. If we can do those things, and I'm determined we can, and look at the support we've had for business on our plans to grow the economy, if we can do those things, we can grow the economy. We do not need to increase taxes. I'm very clear about that.
The only other question was, the £4,800 mortgage hit figure seems to come from your £71 billion of unfunded promises claim against the Tories, but they say that most of that comes from you claiming that they'll scrap NEX and scrap inheritance tax, neither of which are their policies.
Well, they're not in there. Neither of those are in those costings. In the scorecard in that document, Jim, neither of those things are in there because we've taken a very conservative view. We've only taken what is actually in their manifesto. We've only put down £10 billion on NICs from the 2p cut and the £2.6 billion from getting rid of self-employed NICs. We could have added another £36 billion to that because they say in their manifesto they want to get rid of national insurance altogether, but we've only included the things that they have absolutely committed to and put in their own scorecard. We haven't put inheritance tax in there either, despite the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer said in an interview, I think also in the Telegraph, in the first week of the election, that he wanted to get rid of inheritance tax. We have not included those things because they're not in the manifesto. These numbers of £71 billion only comes from things that are in their manifesto. That's very clearly set out in the scorecard. Thank you very much.